Dear Hisar community members, principals, teachers, parents, and our dearest students, I would like to welcome you all to the Hisar Talk series. I am Mahir Badem, working as Vice Principal and Innovation Center Coordinator here in Hisar School. Today, we have come together for the third of Hisar School, which have been organized in honor of the 25th anniversary of Hisar School. Currently, the future of education and technology is being discussed intensively in all educational institutions. On our 25th anniversary, which is an important milestone for our school, we wanted to imagine the future, think about it, and discuss it with experts in their fields. With the third and the last of the conference entitled Systemic Thinking, Disruptive Trends, we will complete the series for this academic year. We will focus on the developments that we face today, the future of our planet and humanity, and the education approach that we are required to follow in educating the talents that can direct this new future. Why is the impact of today's developments growing exponentially? What is the cause and effect relationship of this effect? Why is a systemic approach necessary in an innovative, transformative, and groundbreaking thinking system? These are some of the main questions to which we seek answer with our distinguished guests. The future of our youth will definitely be different from our times and current dynamics. On the one hand, the biggest responsibility of us as educator is to provide our youth with the education necessary to build sustainable future and create just an equal world. I would like to underline that this is one of the main objectives of the conference series. As I conclude my words, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our dear guests, Ayşegül İldeniz and Hans van der Loo, who kindly accept our invitations to join us today. Now, I will leave the stage to our moderator, Philip West. Enjoy your webinar. Philip.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the third in our series of online discussions under the umbrella heading, Reimagining the Future. Today's theme is Systematic Thinking, Disruptive Trends. And seeing as how we at Hisar pride ourselves on the level of English of our students, it was decided that today's talk would take place through the medium of English. However, any guests who would prefer to have a simultaneous translation of the event can simply press the interpretation button, which I believe is at the bottom right-hand corner of their screen. My name's Philip West. I teach mathematics in the high school section at Hisar, and I am your host, moderator, whatever you want to call me, for the event. Fortunately, I'm going to be helped by two wonderful 12th grade students from Hisar, and I would like to very quickly introduce them to you and let them say a little bit about themselves. So first, I'd like to introduce Lara Narchivan.
Hello, my name is Lara, and I'm a senior at Hisar School. And in the next 4 years, I'll be studying at UC Berkeley as a prospective applied math major.
Thank you. And now, secondly, Deniz Uzun.
Hi, I'm Deniz. I'm also a senior at Hisar, and next year I'll be studying at Northwestern University, hopefully majoring in economics.
Okay, thank you. We are delighted to have with us two eminent academics and thinkers who are both at the forefront of their respective fields. Joining us from a rather foggy, so I hear, San Francisco in California, we have Ayşegül İldeniz, a pioneer in innovation, technology transformation, and future vision. Ayşegül İldeniz graduated from the Department of Business Administration at Boğaziçi University and completed her master's program in the Digital Communication Department of San Francisco University. She joined Intel in 1998 as the marketing director for the Mediterranean, Middle East, and Africa region, later becoming their general manager for Turkey, then the regional director for Turkey, the Middle East, and Africa. Finally, she was the world vice president and general manager for business development and strategy, New Devices Group based at Santa Clara in the Silicon Valley. She was also a member of the European Board of Directors. In 2016, she joined the Silver Spring Networks company based in San Jose as Chief Operating Officer and has implemented programs on smart cities in cities such as Chicago, Singapore, Paris, and Copenhagen, and Dubai. In 2015, Fast Company, one of the most prestigious publications in the United States, selected her as one of the top 100 most creative people in the world. And she continues to lead the way in innovation, technology, and future vision, both in Silicon Valley and Istanbul. She's currently working on electric cars in Silicon Valley and is a board member of Zorlu Energy Corporation, Vestel Electronics, and Eczacıbaşı Holding Company. So, Ayşegül İldeniz, first of all, I should say good morning to you and welcome.
Good evening to all of you. Hello, Istanbul. Merhaba herkese. Selamlar. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. We'll be hearing your presentation a little later. Joining us from a surprisingly warm Holland, we have Hans van der Loo, chairperson of the Institute for Integrated Economic Research. He studied in, and I've been practicing this all day, Brooklyn, Paris, Oxford, Düsseldorf, and Tokyo. He began his professional career at McKinsey, then joined Shell, where he worked in over 40 countries and was Shell's chief lobbyist in Europe. Based in Brussels, he was a member of the Advisory Council of Business Europe. In 2012, he joined the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and since 2014, he is the chairman of the Institute for Integrated Economic Research. He advises the European Commission on Education and Sustainability, and is also EU ambassador for the EU STEM Coalition, helping to set up triple helix STEM platforms in several EU member states to strengthen systematic thinking essential to face the exponential challenges of the 21st century. Hans van der Loo, good afternoon to you and welcome. Hans van der Loo, your sound is off. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just saying good evening back to you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. A quick reminder before we start for our audience, there is a Q&A button also down the bottom somewhere where you may ask any questions that you have, and we will do our best to put these to our speakers later on. In my introduction, I mentioned Hans's work regarding exponential challenges, and it is these, I believe, and our collective failure to understand them where we will begin. So, Hans van der Loo, I will now invite you to give your presentation.
Thank you very much, Phil, and very nice to meet people I've met before, like Mahir, like Lara, Dennis. I don't know whether Çelik is online, of course, İrem. I was physically in Istanbul, I believe 2 or 3 years ago, and got the very best memories of that visit. And I'm also quite impressed about the preparations and the kind of questions that you're asking. I know people that are way ahead of you in their lives who do not yet ask these questions. And the fun thing in my experience is that there's actually 2 groups of people who understand these exponential challenges best. And that is actually people who haven't yet started to work and people who have just finished with working. So somehow it seems that our professional garb has very steep colors and actually tunnels our vision a little bit on focusing what the organization you work for demands of you rather than think holistically. So I'm very glad to say a few things about this exponentiality, because it is indeed a characterizing feature of this time. But it has not always been like that. In actual fact, we as a species have been around for about 200,000 or 300,000 years. And this exponentiality is really only a phenomenon of the last 200 years, and in particular of the last 60 years. And that is due to 3 reasons. 2 of them have got to do with us, and one of them has got to do with circumstance. And I hope that most people online understand the difference between a cause and a trigger. You need the accumulated momentum of a cause to be there for the trigger to then unleash a phenomenon. But let's start to think at us. We are quite an unusual species on the one hand, and on the other hand, not that unusual. We share 99% of our DNA with the bonobo chimpanzees. We share 90% of our DNA with cows, 70% with fruit flies, and believe it or not, 50% of our DNA is identical to that of a banana. But we are different, obviously. And the 3 things that really makes us stand out, and it really sits in at last 1%, are 3 things. It's 1, our big brain. That doesn't mean that having it means we use it, but we do have it. The second thing is our tongue, and therefore our language ability, and therefore to communicate with each other. And the third one is the juxtapositional thumb. Monkeys can do it as well. Other animals cannot position their thumb against each of the other fingers. And that makes of this the instrument of instruments. And it is these 3 individual features combined with the second feature that we are used to work in groups. We're good communicators, we cooperate in groups, we got role division, and through that we've been able to flourish and actually to make it for 200,000 to 300,000 years. And you might argue, for better or for worse, to be the most successful species, whatever success means, on the planet ever. But why was it different in the last 60 and 200 years that was not there in the 200,000 years before that? And for that, I've actually sent over to Mahir and Phil and Irem a little video clip. And before you start it, let me invite you to what this is and what to look for. It is a 1-minute video clip. And in there you see the amount of energy we consume. And it starts in 1800. And at that moment in time, you know, all we used was like biomass, bioenergy, solar, you know, wind actually is a function of solar. Wind we used for sailing ships and for windmills. And then there came the discovery of something rather unique, namely a store, an underground store of prehistoric solar energy that nature had actually captured, condensed, and stored. And that is why it's called fossil, because it is basically solar energy from a long time past. So it's different from the sun that shines today. It is compacted, stored solar energy. And that comes in the form of hydrocarbon molecules, either coal or oil or gas. And that is a very dense store of energy. Now, I'd like you to look at 2 things in the clip that you're going to see. First of all, as you see time pass, so it starts in 1800 and it ends today or yesterday. And on the vertical axis, you can see the amount of energy we consume in terawatt hours. And I can tell you already, it starts at about 6,000 terawatt hours for all of humanity. But look at both the vertical scale and the little number, because the vertical scale, if it's 1 line, is just that number. But if there are 4 lines, then you have to add all 4. So look at the total number as well. If somebody can start that video now, then we'll rejoin in a minute. Here you can see the discovery of coal coming in. This is the Stephenson's, the steam machine, the steam engine, bringing a lot of labor and work. And here at the beginning of the last century, you see the discovery of oil. Now that, of course, is much more versatile because it's easier to pump, it's easier to handle, and you can see the acceleration that it is making. And at the total count, you can see we're now at 100,000 terawatt hours, but it still continues. And remember, we started at 6,000. And we also are in the meantime. So basically what this has done, it has enabled the industrialization. It also enabled that in just 200 years, the world population increased 8-fold. And not only are we 8 times more people, the average people stay longer on this planet as well, because life expectancies are longer. And of course, every day we consume energy. So you can see that the energy consumption has grown enormously. Now, since, there's quite a lot of mathematicians, and Lara, you said you're going to study math, in the United States, then you know very well that J-curves only exist in theoretical mathematics. On a finite planet, you cannot have infinity. So what does exist are S-curves, something that starts in a J pattern, and then through feedback mechanisms, flatten down and come down again. Now, what is possible, you can put another S-curve on top of a previous S-curve, but there is the physical reality that is very important as well. And so it was really the discovery of surplus energy. That's the key word of understanding, surplus energy. Because in the old days, most people worked in agriculture and they spent a lot of time simply to prepare their own meal. But with surplus energy, we have energy slaves doing a lot of work for us. And that meant it liberated our time to do other things and to do other forms of value creation. But basically every form of value creation, even telling a story, but I'm meaning value creation in the form of what Ayşegül knows much more about, electric cars or telephones or computers or airplanes or house buildings. Every form of transformation requires energy. So more energy means more transformation, and less energy means less transformation. Now, I forgot to ask you to pay attention at the end of the graph, because what you could have seen there, that we've been at renewable energy now for about 40 years. Now, one has been quite successful, and that is hydropower, the big dams that we've been building. But those, of course, are not really scalable. In the Netherlands, where I am, you cannot build a hydro dam because you need an elevation difference. And if that's not there, then you cannot build a hydro dam. And in a country like China, you can actually tell the population, well, in 5 years' time, there will be a lake here. So just make sure that you're gone in 5 years' time, where we'll flood the valley. In democratic countries, that doesn't quite work like that. So hydro is very good, but it is not very scalable. So the increase in renewables will have to come from wind and solar. But the difference between wind and solar as in renewables is that we will have to do everything ourselves. We have to capture it, we have to concentrate it, and we have to store it. Whereas up till now, we also use solar energy, but prehistoric solar energy, when nature did all that for us. And so basically we've been living off a huge subsidy from nature to enable industrialization. And already now we're noticing that it's getting more difficult, because the easy oil, like we had it 100 years ago, where you dug a hole 5 meters deep in your garden and you had a gusher and you had difficulty sort of containing the oil, those easy oil wells are all gone. It's now offshore, deep water, high pressure, high sulfur. And what that means, we need to spend more energy for each unit of energy we want to get. So what that means is that the net usable energy gets less. And people often say, yeah, but with the sun, we've got infinite energy. Yes, that's correct. We have infinite energy with the sun. But have you ever tried to fry an egg in the sun? It is very low density energy. So we have to do a lot of work to densify it and store it, and to make it available when we want it. For example, to have the lights on in the evening when the sun is not shining. And so very few people really think systemically about the consequences of all this. And so if you agree that this is a carbon pulse, And even if we, and I hope for that more than anybody else, that nuclear fusion will actually one day become usable, the most optimistic reports I read is that we may only have that at scale in 2080. And actually already all my life, we would have it experimentally within 10 years. And it's still within 10 years. So we still have quite a gap between 2020 and the end of this century. And so if I had to think as a young person, and I've got 3 young persons at home, or like you, they're studying, and I think what would be best for their well-being in this world of exponential challenges, there are actually 3 things. The first is we have to make sure that the roof of the world will not collapse on us. And the roof of the world is the Arctic. And because of climate warming, the ice is now melting. And the rate of melting is increasing. And so that will give rise to sea level rise. And to get back to exponentiality, the feature of exponentiality is that you have feedback loops. So you have first a little bit of global warming. Then what happens? The permafrost is starting to melt. If the permafrost melts, then the methane, which is a much stronger greenhouse gas underneath the permafrost, actually gets released. Because it is a stronger greenhouse gas than CO2, it accelerates the warming. We get even more melting. We got even more rise of sea level. So that is something we have to stop. Because most of the wealth and most of our industrial power is in coastal areas. Look at all the big cities of the world, be it Istanbul, be it Miami, be it Rotterdam, be it San Francisco, be it Tokyo, be it Mumbai, be it Shanghai. They're all coastal cities because precisely because they are coastal cities, that is where there was an interface with the external world. That's where the trade ships came in. That's where we met people from other shores. That's why we could do trade. And the hinterland, well, we could bring things in from the hinterland, but it was at that interface that we not only met others, but that's also where we built our industrial assets. So if we cannot stop the melting and not stop the sea level rise, it will lead to a massive asset impairment. So that is the first thing we need to do, make sure that that does not happen. If you're interested, then we can talk later on about that. The second is, we have to use the high density energy that we have at this moment in time to build a society that can actually function with less energy. So for example, insulating a house is an extremely good use of energy because once you make that investment of energy in a very well insulated house, well, thereafter that house does not need much energy anymore. If you can indeed have an electric car, and I don't mean the heavy Teslas, but light electric cars that therefore consume little energy. And my favorite, by the way, is not in the United States, but in the Netherlands, called Lightyear. That is a car that has a very big solar panel. So it cannot accelerate from 0 to 100 in 3 seconds like Teslas can. When would you do that? Because that's a design flaw. Because if you make a car that can do that, you also need heavy motors and big batteries, which make the car very heavy, which actually defeats the purpose of why we do this. What these young people in Eindhoven do, they say, no, this car can only accelerate from 0 to 100 in 10 seconds, which is fast enough. As a result, the engines can be lighter, the batteries can be lighter, and because they put solar panels on it, the car yields energy as well. So the systemic approach there is reduce your need and increase your yield, so that the net need of energy that you need to draw from the system goes down. That is a good example of systemic thinking. Now, you also ask for exponentiality in education, because the greatest resource of all we have is what we have between our ears, but we should use it well. And one of the best things that I know of exponential education is an invention that one of the teams that I've been coaching for the last 2 years has gotten a big prize for last week, and I'm very proud of them. Basically, they devised an artificial intelligence that helps pupils by precisely identifying what they do not understand. And rather than, oh, sorry, you don't understand, you're stupid, well, re-examination or spend the summer at home or do your year again, which causes a lot of frustration and kills off the enthusiasm, particularly for the more exact sciences. Instead, it says, Lara, based on the answers you gave, please read page 32 till 39 again. So it gives a very precise intervention. Then you do that, and then you probably, because the artificial intelligence knows where your hiatus in your understanding is, comes back and tests it, and then you get your next learn level. And like that, three things happen. First, we retain the enthusiasm of young people for STEM topics. Not that STEM topics are better than history or literature, but studying a STEM topic encourages your systemic thinking. Secondly, it actually avoids frustration so that people give up. And thirdly, it saves time of the teacher, who of course would officially need to do that, but a teacher that can get that right 20 times out of 30, I find already a good teacher. But even then, I lose 10 people. And so this artificial intelligence, what it really gives is, in 3 words, personal education at scale. So everyone can get personal education. And that is a great example of exponential education, because you are able to take the best out of everyone.
We've had some questions come in. Lara and Denise have been scouring them and looking at them. We have to apologize in advance if your question does not get asked. We do have a time limit. We'll try and keep going for as long as our guests are able to continue being with us. So I'm going to pass over. I think it is, am I right here? I may have got this wrong. Is it Denise who's going to ask the first question? Yes, and please go ahead, and then we'll get some answers.
Okay, so this question is addressed to Mr. Van der Loo. The question is, developing countries are understandably accusing the richest countries of hypocrisy when they have polluted the earth in achieving economic strength, but are now insisting others follow a green agenda. Do you believe that new technology, which is always expensive in its infancy, should be shared with them at a cheaper price so that they can move forward effectively?
That's a really good question, Denise. It is, by the way, not always true that new technology is necessarily more expensive. I remember that when I was the retail director in the Philippines, that the country manager said, well, Mr. Van der Loo, we're just not going to put any copper wire in the ground anymore. We're going to build towers. So they basically skipped the telephone network that we had, because they just went one further. They went all mobile. So they didn't have the same density of fixed lines that we had in Europe. You had it in Manila and you had it in Cebu. But you know, the outlying regions did not have that, and they never got it because they jumped. But I understand what you're saying, Denise, and of course that is true. I mean, if you look at the history of man and the history of industrialization and all the natural resources that were needed, and even before that, you know, when we still did sugar plantations, I'm afraid it is true that a lot of the Europeans were involved in either occupying, you know, the Americas, exterminating even, you know, many of the local people who nevertheless had great wisdom that some people are discovering now. For example, Ayşegül is in the United States, and she may even know more about it than I do. But for example, the 7th generation thinking of the Iroquois tribe is now getting very fashionable, which basically means that when you do something big, you actually think about the impact a couple of generations from now. They used to do that already hundreds of years ago. Another thing is how we exploited those countries, developing countries that you're referring to, is a slave trade. You know, we just picked up those people and shipped them across, you know, and worked them there. So does that give some kind of moral obligation? In my mind, yes, it does. And there is another thing that actually, whether we like it or not, will make us do this, because nature does not discriminate in the sense that if Arctic ice will melt, and sea level rise will happen, it will not only happen in rich coastal cities or poor coastal cities, it will work in all coastal cities. Now then you have to think, well, where is the money to actually fund the technology to hold off that imminent climate disaster? Well, it's not in poor countries, it is in rich countries. And so the good thing is, if they do these kind of things, these new technologies to do that, then actually they are paying for it, but it benefits everyone. And there's another reason why they should do it, because if we let climate change happen at the pace it is happening now, we will trigger a level of migration that has never, ever been seen before. Already today, scientists think that by the midpoint of the century, between 300 and 400 million people will be moving because they can't stay where they are because the places where they live are being flooded. Jakarta, you probably know about that, is the capital of Indonesia. They have concluded that the capital cannot stay where it is. They cannot keep it dry. So they have to move the capital, but not just also the buildings, but also the people. Vietnam, about 85% of Vietnam will have regular floodings. So 85% of the country will flood. Now, not permanently, you know, you get wet feet, and if you build house on poles, that's no problem. But if the land gets flooded with salt water, you have the salination of the soil. And having lived both in Japan and in the Philippines, where rice is the main staple, rice does not grow in salty grounds. So you get a food supply problem there as well. So in other words, we should really stop that. Now, there are a few good things happening. We now have a CO2 price, as you no doubt know. And actually on the 14th of July, the European Commission will actually come up with a proposal to even bring transport and residential sector into that. And more importantly, they will introduce something that is highly contentious, but I hope it will get along. I've been working on that for a couple of years. It's called technically the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Because if, for example, within one region of Europe, you tax companies for the CO2 they emit, but you allow competitive products that are made elsewhere to come into Europe that do not comply with the same rules, well, the result is quite simple. The European companies will stop to exist and European jobs will disappear. And basically all the manufacturing and the emissions will transfer to somewhere else. And that actually is a big systemic thinking mistake of regulators, because the tradition up till now is you measure emissions by origin, i.e. where they are being emitted. But that's wrong, because that's not a causal relationship. You should measure them by destination. Why are they being emitted? Where is the demand that triggers them? And I don't know whether Irem can hear me now. This would be a good time. I sent her a slide early this morning because I had seen the graph, Denise, thank you for sending that forehand, where you can see that half of the world's emissions are actually being caused by 10% of the richest people. And 10% of the richest people is the 700-800 million people living in the OECD, bar the poorest ones, plus the financial elites in the developing countries. So it's 10% of people that cause 50% of emissions. Now we can all be very indignated and say, China is now emitting more CO2 as a single country than Europe and America ever did together. Well, that is factually correct if you measure where the CO2 emissions are being done. But haven't we all together agreed that China was going to be the workshop for products all over the world? Yes, they may be emitting them there, but they're emitting it for us. And so systemic thinking requires you always go to the cause. And so whilst I agree, Denise, that we have a obligation to not further disadvantage those countries that will actually burn a lot of the brunt of the climate change that we triggered, we do have a responsibility there. But on the other hand, it is also quite clear that the beautiful country, and particularly the beautiful region of California, where Ayşegül now lives, and I visited many, many times, have friends in Carmel and in Monterey. Not everyone can have the American dream, because if every global citizen would have the energy consumption and mineral resource consumption of an average American, we would need 14 planets. Now, since I knew that I was talking today, I checked outside last night and I only saw one. There is only one planet, so not 14. So we will have to stay with our needs within capacity. And that capacity is one planet. Now, if you look at the bottom, the poorest 1%, or the poorest even 50%, even if you look there, you know, they emit very little, they've got very little energy consumption. I think it would be pretty hard for us to say, no, there is no more space for them to use more energy and therefore emit more CO2 and get a larger share. And by the way, before people, yeah, but wait a sec, we can go for renewables. Renewables are not without CO2. Because for renewables, we need massive amounts of metals, turbine blades, neodymium for the magnets, iron for the motors, a copper for the grid, for the storage, etc., etc. And so it can never be a substitute for, capturing flows can never be a substitute for using stocks. So if we're going to have some kind of limitation there, and of course a lot technology can do a hell of a lot with energy efficiency or smart demand management. You know, if there's a peak, you agree that your refrigerator gets switched off. You know, you don't mind if that doesn't run for an hour. You know, you do not want to have the lights switched off when you want to have them on, or perhaps even not your TV switched off when you have it on. But there are parts of the house where you don't mind if that's being switched off. So we can do a lot about demand management. But the overall reality will be, even if we have done everything we can do on energy efficiency, there still will be things that we have to do less of or completely stop doing to keep it all in balance and to give the poorest half a little bit leeway as well. That can only come if the richest 10% will give up a little bit there. Is that an answer to your question, Denise? Otherwise, do push on. Good.
We have another question for Mr. van der Loo. How can we combat the latest trend where known empirical facts like the Earth not being flat, vaccines being safe, and the fact that moon landings occurred are being debated as though they are opinions? So accessibility to education is improving all over the world, but is manipulation ahead of the game? What do you think?
Well, in some countries, yes. And by the way, manipulation does not only happen, you know, by people with bad intentions from the private sector. Governments sometimes also misinform population. And then, of course, you also have manipulation, which is purely commercial. You know, every morning in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there are whole banks of young people that get up and they read what the trending news is, and then they write like nonsense articles and with a headline relating to the trending news, but in a spectacular way, like Trump actually hit the Pope or something like that, you know? So when you then, and that's how our brain works, you know, after you've had your morning coffee, you had your shower, you know, you got a little break and you take your smartphone and you go through the news and what? Trump actually hit the Pope? What's going on here? And then you click on it. And that category often, well, you mean, well, okay, this is nonsense. But because you clicked on it, there were 2 adverts in there, so you became clickbait. So, well, I find it is a reprehensible way of making money, but, you know, that is one thing. But there are also forces at hand who actually want to influence how masses think. I do not know how well informed you are about Cambridge Analytica, which was an English firm that deliberately wanted to manipulate how British people thought about Europe. And they basically made the difference in leading to Brexit and all the repercussions that that will have. So yes, I think the internet has brought a lot of good things, but it has also brought, you know, an exposure to this manipulation. And indeed, you already alluded to that, Lara, you know, could education help with that? And of course, you know, not only, I think there are things, in actual fact, we've been working on that. And if you're interested, look at Very, not Very with a Y, but Very like Veritas, V-E-R-I, media.org. That's, you can see the work that we did there, was basically to attach meta information to the information itself. And by the way, it does not judge opinion because opinion is free, but you know, it will simply judge articles or posts put on the internet along the scores of good journalism as they are being taught. We did not invent that. We just took the journalist code, you know, that are being taught at all journalist schools. Like, do you also have so are the facts correct? Do you have the context? Do you have named sources? Do you have a countervailing view? So that's the qualities of good journalism. And it rates an entry only on that, not on the opinion expressed, just on the process of making that. And clearly, and you know, because I know that you looked at the keynote that I did for the Newton Summit, I am very much engaged in trying to bring education into the 21st century. In my opinion, education is still Victorian. There are many things that people do not know. I shared with Irem a piece of information, I think Ashigul saw it as well, in the Financial Times 2 weeks ago. And they asked 21,000 people in 30 countries, which of the following 10 items has a big impact on reducing carbon dioxide? So changing your incandescent lights for LED, doing one less long distance flight, driving an electric car, not having a car at all, having one less child, separating your garbage, et cetera, et cetera. And what came out is that citizens' understanding is diametrically opposed to biophysical reality. So the things that they thought made a big impact actually were immaterial, and the things that make a real big impact they thought did not matter. So basically, we're now going to be the victim of an uninformed population. And how does a population get informed? Now, obviously, by information campaigns and communication, but also by education. And so I'm very much now out in the street saying, of course, literacy and numeracy remain important. Literacy, you need that to take in information. Numeracy and reasoning is important to put things in perspective, to see proportions. Every child should be able to find out what is the question you need to ask if you're being put forward the following proposal. Do you want a quarter of a big pizza or half of a small pizza? Which is the question that you need to ask to know what the right answer is if you're hungry. So that's a kind, and that's what you get with numeracy. The third competence that people need to get is we must get a better understanding of the interrelationship between our own ABC, meaning actions, behavior, and choices, and our framework conditions, our environment, and our life support system. Because if we do not know that, we may even unintentionally worsen our framework conditions that we need for our survival. So if we're going to do that, let us at least do it knowingly and not unknowingly. And so education plays a huge role there. And media literacy is a new form of literacy that comes on top of that. And I think, you know, quality media are of essential importance to protect democracy. I hope this answers your question, Lara.
And I have another question addressed to Mr. Vanderloo. We observe an exponential increase in the rate of change in all areas. In an earlier presentation, you had 21st century challenges require 21st century education. In your opinion, how should education be shaped according to the requirements of the 21st century? Mr. Vanderloo, you are muted.
Thank you. I made some allusions to that, of course, already, next to literacy and numeracy, also to have a better understanding of our impact on our life support system and a better appreciation how much we need that. Let's be very, very clear. This planet is 4.5 billion years old. We've been here for 0.2 million years. Dinosaurs, by the way, were here 180 million years. So if it's a football match, I know Fatih Birol quite well at the IEA. He's a big fan of Fenerbahce. And we always joke there, said, look, if it's a football match between the dinosaurs and the Homo sapiens, it's 1,000 to 1 in longevity for the species of the dinosaur. We only lived 1,000th of the length of the dinosaur. And actually, I'm not so sure whether we'll ever get close to even beating them because of the changes we've created in our own environment, because the bottom line is people need nature, but nature does not need people. And that awareness is very, very important. So that's the first thing. So we have to have that awareness. Then the second thing is a little bit building on the comment that I just made, you know, we should use all the talent potential. I mean, the two young 30-years that I work with now who got their prize, they have on their website a quote from Plutarchus. And Plutarchus was a Greek philosopher, and he said, education is not filling an empty vessel. It is igniting a flame. That's something completely different. And so what we've seen in education is that education a long time ago, before the printing existed, was highly elitist. You know, the crown prince and the feudal lord children, they went to a monastery and then the monks taught them, you know, and we had a very small group of people who actually had an education. And then we got the media revolution, and that was the printed media. Suddenly it was possible to print books, to have standard class books, to democratize education. And that is what you now all write in now. And I think that we are now at the cusp of the next revolution in education, and that is because of the digital media. Because digital media and artificial intelligence actually allow to combine something, take the best of both worlds. So in the old world, we had individual education, but only for a few. Now we have mass education, but no longer individual for many. And artificial intelligence allows us to give personalized education to all. And that really can unleash in an exponential way the talent potential that we have. And I'm very proud of them that they got a prize last week. And I think I shared it's still in Dutch, but there's already an English version on the website. I think I shared it with Irem. Maybe she could put it in a wrap-up email afterwards. There will come an English proper website as well. And they're also working together with a Norwegian initiative of whom I know that they're actually coming to Turkey. So maybe I should point them to the Hisar school as well, because that is another way of making people being amazed. It is the astonishment, the moment of astonishment and discovery in a young person. Wow, how is that possible? That moment, to capture that moment, that's the moment when you have to tell, you interested to know how that is possible? Well, let me explain. So you actually do the teaching when the child opens the mind because of being surprised, and then you give it. And you don't knock on the door, hey, open up, it's 9 o'clock now, we're doing mathematics or we're doing physics. It doesn't quite work like that. And so with the individualization and the personalization for everyone, thanks to AI, we can actually marry both worlds.
It's about time that we started to wind up this evening. First, I have to say, apologize. Some of you may have noticed that I've had a few connection issues. I don't quite know why, but this happens, I'm afraid. So I've had to sort of move around a bit and go on and off and try and sort it out, but I'm back with you for the last few minutes. It remains for me to thank Lara and Denise for their sterling efforts. I actually wrote this earlier on today, but I now know that they have put in amazing efforts while I've been trying to sort out my technical issues. Thanks to the IT department at Hisar for setting it up and for also helping me sort out the problems. There's a large number of people who've worked behind the scenes over the last 2 or 3 weeks to put this together. And of course, we have to thank once more our very special guests who have given up their valuable time today to share their thoughts with us and to answer our questions. Before we say our final goodbyes, I just want to give both of them the chance to say, are there any last words that they'd like to say?
I always like working with young people, particularly with young, talented people, because it is also true that you will probably see a degree of change in your lives that few, if any, generations before will have seen. Now, the good thing is you also go in there much better equipped than probably any generation before. But don't be too optimistic there, because I say that to my kids as well. They are much smarter than I was at their age, so they can beat me there, but they also have bigger problems to solve than I had. And what is there important is your level of competence in line with the kind of challenge that you have to overcome? But I'm absolutely convinced that people's talent is the most precious resource we have on this planet. And we must make the very best use of it and to address it to the most pressing challenges. And whilst I think that we have a lot of myths in our culture that unfortunately are not aligned with biophysical reality, and if those two play tennis, it's always biophysical reality that wins and the myths that have to go. But the good thing is that if you really think about the source of happiness, the good thing is that that is not material. There are actually books written on that. The United Nations shows statistics, for example, that beyond $11,000 GDP per capita, the correlation between more GDP and more happiness is 0. So Kuwait, for example, is at 82,000, Guatemala is at 11,000, but happiness score is the same, even though they have got 7 times more. Because the greatest source of happiness is actually relationships with other people. And they will always be there to enjoy. And if we can be more understanding of the changes in our framework conditions, and that therefore certain things we'll have to accept and certain things we'll have to let go. But if we can all do that and understand why it is and keep focusing on enjoying each other, I am absolutely sure that whilst mineral resource-based wealth in the rest of the century will probably be less than we have now, we're now at a peak. But the good news is that well-being can actually be higher. And even on the mineral resource-based wealth, I've seen the latest study that we have issued, and our forecast there is for 2050 that GDP will be at the level of 1995. Now, 1995 was not a bad year, at least not in OECD countries. And of course, developing countries, it wasn't good, but it's still not good. But, you know, within that level of material availability, a lot of well-being increase is still possible. But it is important also that people learn to appreciate those dimensions rather than measuring each other by the quality of your watch or your shoes or your brand of car. So if you can bring that dimension into education as well, then I've got a lot of positive hope for the future. And thank you indeed very much. And Ayşegül, it was great doing this with you today. I think Phil may be having a technical problem, so let me also just add that, like Ayşegül, I look forward to a next time that I can come to Istanbul, like was there 2 or 3 years ago, and I very much enjoyed it. It's a special city at the intersection of roads, the old Constantinople, and also the Bosporus is a very symbolic sea connecting the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. But Istanbul is also a seaboard city. So you do have an interest in avoiding sea level rise as well, particularly the lower part of Istanbul. Now I see Phil's image moving again. So hopefully.
Phil is back.
Yes, thank you. The connection issues are continuing. So before my computer bursts into flames and really does mess everything up finally, I should give my final thank you is to everybody out there who has joined us online and watched the webinar. I'm sure they found it fascinating. And we look forward to seeing you again in the near future. As Ayşegül Hanım said, hopefully in a face-to-face environment. So from me, all I say now is to everybody, please stay safe and stay healthy. Sağlıklı kalın, iyi akşamlar, good night and goodbye.